The new globalization goes by many names. Occupy is one. The American Occupy movement began in September 2011 with a tent encampment on Wall Street in New York City, the financial center of the world. Bank bailouts of massive proportions following the banking collapse of late 2008 was a catalyst for mass protests in the U.S. 3 years later. The Arab uprising of early 2011 was an external trigger for a popular response in the U.S. to continuing government bailouts for banks while government was ignoring rising unemployment. The deepening reality that President Obama, 2 years into his administration, was not acting to protect the interests of the people was an internal stimulus. No jobs programs, no federal financial support for failing cities and states, schools closing, tuitions raised, seemingly no end to the endless wars. The tent occupation of a park in New York quickly spread to hundreds of occupations across the U.S. Public spaces were claimed as platforms for public expression of discontent with government policies. Political speech is constitutionally protected. The tent occupations were acts of dissenting political speech, much like holding a sign during a rally. The presence of tents camped at the foot of the gleaming towers of Wall Street banks was visible political dissent. The Occupy movement is both local and particular to a specific camp in a specific city, and simultaneously universal with encampments across the nation based on shared principles of solidarity. Popular uprisings, now active in the Arab world, Western Europe, and the U.S., are popular responses to the global economic collapse of 2008, to the control of government policies by the rich which prevent economic recovery for the many, and to the violent American military expansion of empire. These uprisings are the visible manifestations of an expansive, transnational, popular solidarity. The universal objective is to seize power from the corporate, economic, and banking elites. The Occupy movement organizes mass popular street actions directed towards seizing control of power from concentrated corporate wealth and from the state itself that serves the interests of wealth, the few, the 1%. Occupy is characterized by anarchist principles of direct democracy, wherein the people engage in direct, collective decision-making. Occupy dispenses with the more familiar form of representative governance that pushes power up into an elite political class. For occupiers, democracy is a way of life, not an occasional visit to a voting booth. Direct democracy is a radical transformation of constitutional governance as is practiced here in the U.S. and Western Europe. Occupy operates without an elitist central governing body, nor has it individual administrators granted central authority. No president, no leaders, no chairmen, chairpersons, no general managers, no one handing out orders. Occupations hold meetings called General Assemblies where policies are presented to the whole for consideration and discussion is amongst the many. Task-oriented work groups meet to consider specific policy concerns in a decentralized, leaderless decision-making process. The process of Occupy is more important than any particular policy position. The process itself is a dynamic of direct human dialogue. Occupy is an experience, a process, a community, community building, and solidarity, and action, not a passive, spectacular event, as are the electoral processes and the political processes that are better known for the United States and Western Europe today. Democracy, we might say, and define it as subversive. Democracy is dangerous to the established political and economic elites, those found in the so-called Western-style democracies. As our brothers and sisters Filipinos know, constitutional representative governance was forced upon them at gunpoint 100 years ago. Scholarly work by such scholars as Thomas Ferguson has documented how representative-style governments universally function to represent the interests of the wealthy, the few of a nation, not the interests of the people as it is presented to be. Nor does it represent the interests of the people to protect the commons, the water, the land, the air quality. The Commons deserves detailed discussion in the General Assembly process, but it also requires direct action to protect these natural resources and commons for ourselves and for our children and future generations. But it will suffice to note that the Commons is the natural environment, and it's much, much more than the natural environment. It's resources used to sustain human life, and it's also everything that we identify with the richness of culture, such as shared information and shared human networks. The second principle of Occupy is direct action. To manifest the will of the people, actions are directed toward reclaiming and physically seizing the commons, the common spaces shared by all. Occupy is a radical movement that works outside the mainstream power systems and institutions to achieve two goals. One is to demand redistribution of wealth, noted by the slogans "Tax the Rich" and "We are the 99%. The encampments themselves at the occupations, the tent encampments, and the participation in the General Assembly process, the living in the encampments, the tents are a visual object of political dissent, and also the seizing of a small space for the popular use of the people in their democratic processes. One is to demand redistribution of wealth, noted by the slogans "Tax the Rich" and "We are the 99%. The encampments themselves, the tent encampments, the locations in Wall Street and Oakland and San Francisco and Los Angeles spread throughout the United States, these are physical spaces that represent political speech, political dissent in opposition to government policies. But more than that, they also represent a physical taking of space for the use of the General Assembly for the people, and as a statement that the commons, that we share the land, the earth, the water, and the political space is represented by the encampments. Another goal is to build community. In the U.S., state and corporate policies have isolated individuals. Public services are generally of poor quality with respect to other industrial countries. Communities are created out of institutions which promote communication, architecture, land use, and public transportation congregate or isolate individuals. Occupy is less a thing than an attitude of self-reliance and of assertive collective will. When Occupy wants a children's center, for example, it doesn't write letters pleading with government officials or signing petitions. Occupy creates its own children's center. While practicing self-reliance, Occupy also pressures government in street actions to demand for government services such as public child care and to the end of foreign wars of empire, for example. Community values borrowed from Indigenous tribal traditions are applied within the context of modern Western techno-culture. Oakland recently attempted to claim a vacant public building for use as a children's center and a community center to provide services directly to the community members. The action included a rally, a march through the streets, and, regrettably, confrontation with police as they suppressed the autonomous action. End to wars of empire, new jobs programs, free education and health care, and action on global warming are some of the specific policy demands of Occupy. The idea of the commons is central to the movement. The movement visits the question regarding what should be in the public domain and what should be private. The air we breathe is considered a common public resource, but the workplace is dominated by private wealth through ownership of the corporation. The concentrated power of the corporation is rejected in favor of democracy in the workplace, using cooperative ownership and cooperative management of production. The modern workplace is frequently a complex, large-scale enterprise. Democratic government was a novel idea during the 17th century. Democratic workplaces is the novel idea still of the modern world. Work belongs in the commons and is best organized communally. The colonial and neo-colonial globalization expanded through violent military conquest and coercion of local elites. Growing out of the commonality of shared human values, the Occupy movement became a transnational, global, yet popular movement without coercion and without central bureaucracy. The new globalization is a leaderless challenge to the familiar capitalist version of the centuries-old Western European global colonial system. Occupy challenges 500 years of global domination by Western elites. The Occupy direct democracy movement challenges world domination by the capitalist economy, private property, and the parliamentary political system. The new globalization is without centralized, concentrated decision bureaucracy and without concentrated wealth. And yet the principles of self-determination and self-governance are founded on universal principles of sharing, mutual aid, expansion of the commons towards the end of corporate ownership and control of land and the means of production. Occupy does not have leaders and therefore no headquarters in New York or any other location. If the new globalization did have a headquarters, it would not differ structurally from the current system of state capitalist exploitation. Not having any internal leaders, Occupy does not look for external leaders either. Rather than working within the existing political power structure, Occupy Oakland, for example, shut down the Oakland shipping port using peaceful, nonviolent tactics. In solidarity with trucking and port labor activists, mass action picketing blocked shipping and thus deprived transnational capital of profits and affecting banking and global commerce. Such a general strike is a constructive effort. Occupations have successfully organized citizens to move personal savings out of banks and into nonprofit credit unions to weaken corporate power structure from below. Police suppression of free speech and assembly have been state responses to Occupy encampments and actions. The new globalization uses the new technologies of communication, desktop computer publishing, the internet, and most recently, cell phones used as mini mobile internet devices. Mass global communication for social change relies on active, decentralized websites, blogs, Facebook, live video streaming, Tumblr, Twitter, and others, rather than passive, centralized corporate media such as TV, radio, and newspapers, although small-scale community radio has been used and adopted for community purposes. What the future will bring is unknown, but the notion of direct democracy, direct action, and expanding the notion of the commons has universal appeal. Popular movements spread ideas, not at the end of a colonial military gun or neo-colonial banking system, but by word of mouth, by popular demand, by word of Twitter and blogs and Facebook and the internet, and through shared consciousness. The struggle for human dignity knows no geographic or political boundaries. This is Occupy the Other Globalization.